And it's something that I hope that you'll think about. Anti-trafficking work is exhausting. And the only way that we'll survive it is by working together and by sharing each other, supporting each other, lean in on colleagues and survivors, and don't be afraid of saying, I didn't know that. Because what I found as we're working in this space is that my greatest teachers have been survivors. And when I said to them, I don't know what you're talking about, could you explain some more? They became my greatest instructors. And so if you have the gift of having survivors in your organization or in your life, or as patients, please learn from them. And even though I'm talking about this, amplifying your efforts as healthcare providers, this applies to all disciplines, because we cannot do this work alone, and it is a good recipe for burnout if we try to carry this load on our own. So I'm here to kind of talk through ways to amplify your efforts and not have to be exhausted at the end of the day, still love what you do. So that's the purpose of today's talk. And because I didn't allow you any time, I just kind of ran off the stage, I will make sure that I allow some time for you to ask me questions about either this process that I'm about to share or about the previous talk of climate change and human trafficking. So feel free to interrupt. And this is a workshop, so this is going to be very interactive. I might have to modify what I'm asking you to do, but I really want you to put some work into this one. Sorry. But this is the idea. We're going to talk about how do you amplify what you're doing, because some of you are probably already getting burnt out in this work, and I want to stop that. I want to preserve you and love you and figure out a way to keep you in the game for a long, long time. I want you also, by the end of this, to be able to recognize what is a good, trauma-informed, survivor-led curriculum. There are, especially after that Sound of Freedom, don't get me started, but especially after that, there's a lot of pop-ups out there, a lot of pop-up organizations, anti-trafficking organizations out there, and many are not trauma-informed, they're not survivor-led, and what that means is it's very, very not helpful in this movement. And so I want you to be able to recognize that's a curriculum I really don't want to have in my organization, and I want you to be able to also start to identify the champions in your community that aren't at the table with you. So I think that's going to be super important. Having one law enforcement person, just to give you an example, back in Pennsylvania, Stephanie was a rock star, but there's only so much a 5'2" little woman can do. Physically small, heart of gold, but when she's trying to talk to local law enforcement about what trafficking looks like in our community, it's hard for one person to do that. And so now with 7 special agents in our area, it's a lot easier. So the more that are invited to this party, the better. So I want to share a story about, I think Honorable Dama spoke about what made her, what was her driving factor. So I'm going to share this story with you about what is my driving factor for being here. So when I was working in the emergency department, it was a Saturday morning, and I was told by the ER nurse, you got a sexual assault in bed 1. Young girl, 15, looks like she's been drinking. Her name's April. It's not April, but she looks like she's been drinking. She's by herself there. So that was that was the case. And so when the nurse shared it, I didn't really think about it. She's by herself, and she's 15, early Saturday morning. Okay, I went in, I took care of her. We didn't have a sexual assault nurse examiner at our ER at the time, so I did the exam, took care of her, and gave her resources. I thought I did an okay job. Fast forward 7 years later, we are a team that's now providing health care to persons experiencing homelessness and in shelters. And there is a shelter in our community for sex trafficked women. And a young woman came up to me, she was 21, and she said, "Hey, did you ever work at the Heart?" Which was the nickname for the ER that I've been working in. And as she started to share her story, I realized that this was April. And when she had seen me 7 years earlier in the ER, she had gotten wasted and been raped by her boyfriend's friend. And so I took care of her in that way, but I didn't really do the topic thing, like, blah. I just took her. And now fast forward, and I'm meeting a young woman who 7 years later is now telling me that her boyfriend had been selling her to his friends for sex. And when I saw her alone at 15, and she just wanted to hurry, she wanted a police call because she's got Liz 9 and she needs to get home to take care of her brothers and sisters. I didn't think about her rushing out of the ER, and I didn't think about anything other than taking care of her right in that moment. But now I have a gift 7 years later of meeting her in a space where it was a holy for holies, like, oh my God, what have I missed? If I'm seeing April now, what did I miss? I didn't recognize trafficking at that time, and that was my why. April is my why. And 10 years now later after that, April and I are still good friends. She's getting a driver's license. She's getting married, hopefully to a good guy. I haven't met him yet to give my approval. But what I'm saying is that I have the gift of 2020 and being able to look back and see that as a healthcare provider, I had an opportunity. She came to me as a trusted healthcare provider, and I missed it. And so with humility, I'm saying that we have a lot to learn, but we also have this great gift of knowing that people are coming to us as trusted persons. And so what can we do to affect change that way? So thank you, April. So there's a really goofy, I don't know if you've heard this, but when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. That's what they tell us in like medical training oftentimes. And any idea what that means? It's kind of silly.
Something's coming behind you? I don't know.
What's that?
I said maybe something's coming up behind you. Hoofbeat. Uh-oh.
It's what it's supposed to mean, and I think this is the thing that's so wrong. Why do we use dumb things when we talk about medical training? But what it's supposed to mean is look for the obvious. So don't look for zebras, look for the thing that you were trained in. Don't look for some weird thing that you can't understand or you haven't been really taught or trained about. Look for the thing that is most obvious. Look for horses, not zebras. But the problem is, we're not being trained on the horses. We're not being trained about trafficking. And so how can we even look for the hoofbeats of the horses if we're not being trained? So all this to say that we have to start thinking about how are we affecting the providers in our area, the organizations that we work with, how can we create a space for education?
Hi, so I was sharing with the group that one of the strangest experiences I had with a medical provider was actually a woman doctor, my woman primary care physician. It was like an annual checkup, and she was running through the questionnaire to ask me, and one of the questions was, are you sexually active? Which I was not, and I was maybe 10 or 11 years old. And when I said to her, no, I'm not sexually active, she said, good girl. And that, especially when putting this in the bigger conversation of human trafficking, that could have absolutely shut the doors down for any further communication, right? Like a provider is supposed to cultivate a space for the patients they're treating to be able to be transparent about the state of their health and their well-being. And just thinking about like the public health approach of asking why that you introduced to us in your previous session. We were talking about how under the social conditioning, current social conditioning, I think the automatic response to maybe a 10 or 11-year-old saying she is sexually active is to try to figure out what we can do to stop her from being sexually active, what we can do to make her stop having sex. But when you ask why, right, it's not an interrogation of the individual and a suggestion for the individual to stop doing something, but instead an investigation of the context in which this 10-year-old is having sex. If it is sex, it might be rape. So we were just talking about how even when the conversations are not directly, explicitly about assault, of non-consensual sex, the way that a provider discusses and approaches conversations just about like bodily autonomy, that can really make or break that relationship that one develops with the patient they're treating, especially when the patient's a youth.
Preach it. Oh my gosh. Thank you for sharing, but obviously many years later, it still traumatized you. So you still think about it. And so I can't even imagine. I was just sharing with, oh my gosh, Mika. I was just sharing with Mika that as much as I get excited that our hospital system has this anti-trafficking response team, that there's still 20,000 people that we still haven't reached, right? So there's a lot of still people that aren't trauma-informed and say terrible things like that. So we can do better. And so thank you for sharing that. And hopefully you got to hear some silliness and also some probably not so nice stories. But this works. But maybe it doesn't, we'll power through it. So we talked about how interventions can look at prevention and stopping, and so Wonder Woman's my girl, and so I'm really, and I love Linda Carter, please, not the new fancy girl, but is this a prevention type of space, or are we looking at a response space? So our next exercise is just thinking about, so if anyone doesn't know the bottom right, so Linda Carter is the girl. She's the woman on the top there. Like,
Wonder Woman.
yes! I got a Wonder Woman little luggage bag on my backpack. But the bottom right, which is the emergency.
Yeah.
So there's a Roy DeSoto and Johnny Gage. I was in love with Johnny Gage.
Yes, they were both cute.
But they ran on the rig in LA County, and I was just in love with them. But their response was different than the prevention response. We took over a little bit, and you got to understand kind of what's driving someone other than the day away from work. To be here. I think these conferences, and again, thank you to University of Washington's top member team for bringing this forward, because it is rare to have this much brain power in a room, and we've got great partners in the back that can share all of their resources. So the next thing that I want to, one of the objectives was to start talking about how do we know if the training that you want for your organization, you want to arm yourself, just like I did when I was starting to think, oh my gosh, how many people have I missed? I needed to find an organization that could provide training, and there's a lot of good training, there's also a lot of bad training out there. And so we are charged, I charge you with finding good, healthy training, and don't be embarrassed to ask.
did a survivor review this training? Did they give their input in this training? Because it shouldn't just be about allies, and I'm an ally. It shouldn't just be me saying what I want to say. It should be informed by our survivor leaders and our survivors. The other thing is there's a lot of sex sells, right? We all know that. And so when I first started learning about human trafficking, everybody spoke about sex trafficking. The organization that I was on the board for was Valley Against Sex Trafficking. Nothing wrong with that, but is there a balance in the curriculum that you're learning from with labor trafficking? Honorable Belmont spoke about that. One of the reasons why we are missing it is if I'm as a provider only getting trained in sex trafficking, I'm going to be looking for women and children and not looking for men. And so not that our lesbian, gay, bi, transgender, queer men aren't coming to see me, but we're missing labor trafficking. And so I just want to make sure that we are looking for a curriculum to help educate your organization and train your organization. Is it balanced? Is there a lack of sensationalism? And so I asked, because I tend to pick the same pictures, but I asked my cohorts that work at HEAL to find some images that are sensationalistic, like the stuff that makes you cringe, that you should not be participating in that kind of training. So I asked them to do that. And as I shared, don't be afraid to ask. If you're asking for somebody to do a training, who's been informed by? It shouldn't just be us, but it should be informed as the survivors looked at this and given it a blessing. I think that's huge. Oftentimes I use very little data because a lot of it can be inflated. So just know that there's a lot of misleading data out there. So I also charge you as anti-trafficking efforts, as you're kind of creating those efforts to make sure that the data that you're putting in there is real data, that it's evidence-based data, and it's not just sensationalistic data to get people to give you money or get people to shop them. Does that make sense? So there's a lot of crazy data out there that I want to make sure that when you're picking a training, when you're trying to amplify it, when you're creating a training for yourself, that's not happening. And then I spoke about the sex trafficking, and then lecture style. Like, you and I all grew up, and some of you in the COVID era, that had to do all the virtual training. But for the most part, you were like Charlie Brown's teacher, and it's hard because there's nothing very engaging about it. And what I'm doing to try to show you some there, we're busy, right? And so somebody just came from the DA's office trying to put fires out. Someone's coming in and they're stepping out and making some calls and trying to put fires out. So we have to be able to provide a curriculum to amplify our efforts that is not boring, that meets many different learning styles. I'm a visual learner, I'm in kinesthetic, meaning like if I do it, which makes sense when I was on an ambulance crew, if you show me how to do something, I can learn. So when we do training, and so when you want to amplify your efforts, it's going to be important that you mix your training styles to meet the different styles of your learners, your adult learners, because the lecture boring style is going to make everybody fall asleep. You're going to see everybody glazed over, and you're just not reaching anyone. You can just talk to a wall then. So I want to encourage you, some of the reasons why it's a little bit easier in smaller teams. So when we do these trainings, the Human Trafficking does these trainings, we have very small groups. So then you get up and move, and we make the state patrolmen go sit with the social workers, and we kind of move people around, because movement creates learning. And every once in a while throw a poll, which I did, to show you some different ways to kind of engage people, keep people connected, talk to each other. This is where the real stuff is happening, is at your tables, not here with me, but thinking about ways to engage each other. And so The small group learning, you'll find it's difficult with 100+ people, but the small group learning is where it's at. So the more you have activities that happen at a table, as you're learning to amplify your efforts, the more things will sink in. So one of the things I want in the next activity, let me show you some, don't do this. How many people have seen this? Sure. And some horrible statistics that people just, I mean, they quote them, it's great that they're quoting them, but there's some really powerful statistics out there that aren't helpful. Oftentimes they're for shock value and not necessarily there to provide good depth. It just scares people into not knowing what to do next. And so be careful about the data that you use, and people are quoting them. I had my colleagues look up some data, and this is scary stuff. And there are 2 children sold every minute in the US, every 26 seconds a child is sold into slavery, and they quoted it. So there's a resource that talks to that, but again, be careful of the training that has data that scare you, because it should be evidence-based and used for a purpose. So this is not what I want you to use. Just be careful of that. Look at this picture. What kind of response does that evoke for you? It's, again, sensationalistic. Don't do this. And again, you'll blame this because this is not trauma-informed. It's there to evoke a response. It's there to make us scared, make us feel bad, it's get people's attention, it's shocking people. Again, this is not what we want. We want trauma-informed that's got good knowledge, keeps people interested, but doesn't try to scare people into submission. I'm good. Let me see if I can get back. There's a little bit of hesitation. There. So, to me, I'm important, I have to do that because I'm very proud of the way we develop curriculum. But it's very small, so you can see this is a small group of people, so I encourage you when you do your trainings, think about keeping it small because we want people to get out and move around. People are less likely to do that in a big group and want to because you're settling in nicely, but think about getting the accurate statistics, think about ways to engage. You can't really see the back screen, but it's a game time. They're about to do a game. And so in the beginning, people are like, oh God, we're gonna sit down. But for those kinesthetic learners out there, for the people that learn by doing, the games really help. So the people that are like the lecture learners that do better with just being talked at, they do fine with this, like what you and I were doing. But the people that are kinesthetic learners, even though I'm like, oh, I don't want to get up, I actually learn. I'll remember when I have to do something. So when you are creating a space to amplify your efforts, think about ways that you can not do boring lecture and have some fun with games. Case studies are helpful. So if a survivor wants to give a gift of sharing a case, it can be totally changed, the name can be changed, but share a case. That's why I shared, I looked up, I'm not from here, as I shared from Pennsylvania, but I looked up cases that were here to bring it home to you because I think it's important. But cases are important, and if you can use a case to help emphasize a point, it'll be very helpful. So we use cases a lot in our training to think of ways to, we have a library of cases, so depending on what we want to teach. Some survivors have shared their cases with us, so we've gotten the permission to share it. Some providers, like my boss, shared some of the cases. I shared some cases that happened to me of patients that I've cared for and some of the learnings that I've had. So think about ways to build a case library for yourself so that you can hit home depending on what kind of emphasis you want to make. As I mentioned before, games can be helpful, not in excess, but we had some pretty fun games that we did. We had some of our law enforcement, they actually did the best. Those are the ones that were kind of grumbling, were in their pockets and didn't want to do anything. But they were the ones that actually got into it, so we had them act out without words risk factors of trafficking. And it was fun, like it was actually fun to see them do that. So again, think of ways that you can build in your curriculum some things that are different. This is a heavy topic, right? Human trafficking is not an easy topic to teach people about. And so think of ways that you can kind of build in some more interactive ways. And I keep saying this and I keep saying it again, but if you have the gift of survivors, if you don't, find some. If there are survivors here, find some survivors if they have shared that they are and they want to help influence your curriculum. This is important. We've had the gift of so many people. Like I said, we have over 5,000 survivors as part of the HEAL community that many of them have had their hands in our curriculum, and I wouldn't do it any other way. But please make sure that you align yourself with survivors to help influence the work so that everything is focused on how do we provide better support for survivors.
Yeah,
So,
some curriculum.
Sure, go ahead. Question?
If you, not a comment, but a question, if you see survivors who are greater curriculum, or you use survivors as trainers, and
Yes. So,
and
amen. Yes. So, if you didn't hear her comment, it was, this is not, and I thank you for helping me, forcing me to say that out loud. I did not say it. But if you are utilizing survivors and they're informing your education or they're trainers, pay them, right? So as much as I get passionate about doing this, and it's fair wage, they are experts in their field, so make sure you're paying them fair wages. They should be paid just as much as a professor, an honorable, anything. So they should be paid fairly. Comment or question?
Yes, I'm a survivor leader, and I want to write curriculum, but I don't know where to start. So if there was some technical assistance, that would be excellent.
Will you see me after? I want to align you with Survivor Alliance.
I sure will.
There's a fantastic Survivor Alliance program that helps survivors. They give them stipends. They train them from business models to knowing how to set yourself up for success in lecturing. See me after, and I'll be happy to help you with that. But this is the other thing right here. Because I'm a clinician and many of you are not clinicians, I'm finding, this was my thing, is I'm not a teacher. So whatever you are, I'm in the DA's office, I'm not a teacher. So if your goal is to not be the only one jumping up and down in human trafficking education, and you want to amplify those efforts, you're going to have to learn to be a teacher and be a good teacher. And I don't mean that in a threat. I just mean what will keep you engaged. You're going to think about things that will keep you interested, but also think about ways to involve people. And so this is part of the gift of trying to amplify. You have to amplify with not just your own training. It's kind of like that love languages. That Gary guy that talks about love languages, we tend to share our love language with how we want to be loved. So I like acts of service. So I'm gonna do something service oriented for something that I love. But that doesn't help the person that likes to be praised. Does that make sense? Their teaching is similar to that. So when we teach, we can't just teach based on our style, but we need to teach based on everybody's style and have it sprinkled in there, so that we're reaching everybody. So that's another way to amplify. So,
can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so the group we have here thought that games, play, creativity would really enhance any kind of group. Music, food as well. And it is always in a safe environment.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So we learned a lot. So creating a safe space for people to feel comfortable sharing food is always good. You're speaking to my heart that way. Go right through my stomach. And then just being able to kind of keep people active. This is post-lunch. If you're in a post-lunch group, you need to do something, right? That's always hard because people are like after that. So the next thing that I just want to share, because I want you to think about, is one of my favorite quotes, and from Mr. Rogers, and he shares that when I was a boy, I'd see scary things in the news, and I mean, think about human trafficking, And my mother would say to me, look for helpers. You will always find people who are helping. And let's talk about now. So I think the best bang for your buck, the work harder, work smarter, not harder, is finding a train-the-trainer model. Heel trafficking is not unique to that, although I have to say I think we do a very good train-the-trainer model. And so find a good train-the-trainer model, because you don't want to be the only one jumping up and down. You want to find others, and you want to train others to jump up and down with you and do this work together. So find a good model, and I'll give you some information about that. It's simple stuff really, because you don't want to be the only one. Burn yourself out if you do that. As we shared before, make sure you're seeking out a trauma-informed curriculum, one that doesn't teach what this young lady shared, like how are they talking to people that are potential victims or survivors. We don't want that. Like, we know what not to do. So make sure that in the training, that they're training from a trauma-informed, survivor-led approach, and you can ask those things. And then, we've already talked about the last one, use some tools of engagement, whether it's icebreakers, polls. Generally, polls don't work for me, so I'm so happy it actually did. But usually technology is not my friend. And so find things that can really engage your audience and keep people connected. I'm not a techie person, my kids make fun of me, and so having to use polls was a stretch for me to learn how to do that. So think about things like that. We have an annual, Keel happens to have an annual Train the Trainer every October. So I invite you to come participate in that training, and hopefully then you can replicate yourself. So feel free to secure your spot. There's a lesser fee for people that don't need CME, but if you need CME, it's a little bit more expensive. But that's coming up in just about a month. So feel free to join us. But there are other places around here, I'm sure, that do a Train the Trainer. I just have not Googled it because I wanted to plug you, of course. The other thing, Sutapa, can I leave this presentation? You can have it so that people can, because I'm moving fast to get people to lunch. So again, this is the Train the Trainer. Per usual, I want your feedback. So this is the same feedback thing that I gave in the keynote. I need to improve what I do, and it's also managing my time better. So if you can share with me what you think about this presentation and what I can do better, that's part of my growth as a trainer. So I want to learn how to be not just a clinician, but a better trainer. So feel free to share your feedback. And these are my horses. So I want you to meet them. So the two on the right are mine, and the two on the left are my friends. So this is Matt on the right, Wyatt, Cyril, and Eli. And they always look like they're asking questions. It doesn't look like they're asking. I feel like that's really. So I want to give you some time now, since I didn't give you any time before, to ask me questions. And I think Maria's got the microphone, so don't start yelling them out yet. But raise your hand and she'll go on the microphone. She'll get some more steps in before we get to lunch. But and thank you for giving me the time to double whammy you and chat with you, and for this beautiful space. So thank you, Maria, for running. But does anyone have any questions that I can answer or say I don't know? Feel free. Thank you.
Hi again. So my question was based on the first presentation you did. I was curious if in your research you found that domestic climate change, or like the climate change that happens here in the U.S., that also having an impact on human trafficking. I think a lot about how some of us, providers, not providers too, but like organizations work with survivors of domestic human trafficking. So it's not necessarily about crossing international borders, that may be crossing state borders, or maybe remaining within the same state. And I know that, with environmental racism being so rampant here as well, like that also affects movement and migration, national migration, state by state migration. So I was wondering if you had like an analysis on domestic climate change and its relationship to human trafficking.
I know there's a study out there. I'll have to ask Holly, who's like our virtual librarian, and she's our founder. So I'll have to, I know there is some work, but what I can share is domestic, what we've seen the most of has been agricultural work. So the movement that our labor trafficking victims have had is following crops. So if the cherry season is cut short, then they have to move to an area for apples, and then they have to move. So that's what we've seen as far as domestic, that it follows productive crops or unproductive crops. And so that's what I don't know the study off the top of my head, but I know there is some. So I will get back to you on that one, and I'll leave that for Sutapa to post once I have that as a reference for you. Great question. Any other questions? Let's launch. Oh, we have a question here. Mom here.
Hi. So my question is, which is just something you covered earlier, so I'm asking why. I wanted to know, just a clarification from a medical aspect, how do you ask a patient why without being invasive? Like, I can understand how you can kind of dig deeper, working at an organization where someone may anticipate you to ask them more basic questions, but how do you do that from a medical standpoint, where the patient can feel receptive to that?
Thank you for that lead-in. So I think in a trauma-informed training, what you would learn is that it's actually not about digging deep right then, it's about building relationships. And I think that is the essence of trauma-informed training. I'm not going to get anyone to share anything with me if they don't trust me or they value me as a provider. And so I'm not asking any questions. In fact, there's survivors that I cared for 2 years, never heard their story. But what I knew, because of my trauma-informed training, was that there was something vitally wrong, that if I didn't tread lightly and let them trust me as a provider, I wasn't going anywhere. And so I couldn't dig at all. And so when I'm thinking about digging, I'm actually thinking about mentally. So it's not enough. It's like the disruptive kid in class. Why? And I'm not asking that kid, right? I'm not saying, why are you being such a little poop head in class? I'm wondering, a kid that is disruptive like that, there is something going on. So I'm asking why in my head. A disruptive kid is a frustrated kid. So why is that? And so I'm not necessarily asking him, but I'm asking why is that kid disruptive? Why is that woman sitting in the ER that wants to throw daggers at me with her eyes? Why doesn't she want to talk to me? And those are the ones I want to get cozy up with. But I want them to know me as a person. I don't want to necessarily ask them why. So that's a great question. I'm sorry if I didn't clarify that. So I think our job as people supporting survivors and victims is we ask it in here, but we don't necessarily have to verbalize it. We just have to build a sense of trust in the relationship for when we're ready. I mean, literally, a survivor for 4 years that I knew didn't share her story until she shared it with Eli. So she started to come over and pet Eli, and then she wrote a poem to Eli, and then she read it to Eli. And so I was blown away because I had no idea what her story was. I just knew that she needed love, but I didn't know anything more than that. So I think if I misspoke, thank you for bringing that. So when we say why, sometimes it's just up here. Why is that kid misbehaving? Why does that woman not want me to talk to her? Like, why is she wanting to get out of my ER and not be touched by me? Why does she flinch when I go to touch her? So I think that's the kind of things that I want you to think about, not necessarily asking and interrogating, but thinking about, there's got to be a reason that somebody's acting with the way they do with self-protection at its finest. So I think I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? Lunch? So I think, one more? Okay, last one, and then Maria is gonna make some announcements about lunch.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. Is there a program or something for education, prevention of human trafficking coming from the southern border? From the border, from the south? Because usually, immigrants that come to the border, they're escaping for a better life, or they're escaping some kind of trauma or other situation that they're in. But there are also victims of human trafficking. So is there any program or anything working with law enforcement, border patrol, to treat these cases as they should instead of just seeing them as violated in the lawful community or documentary? Because they usually don't see that. And I'm a survivor of that.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing your story. So the question was, are there programs that help to inform Border Patrol, some of the areas of help? Yes, there are. But it doesn't mean that everybody's had the same training. So Homeland Security has training, some of it not so good. Some of them really good. So we just happen to have a really stellar team in our area, but they haven't all reached the same space. And so there are good programs out there. I would definitely encourage you, if you haven't, join the HEAL community. It's free. It's you can click on healthcare provider, non-health provider, and it's a place where over 20,000 people share information. So there's probably a program out there that I'm not aware of, but I know there are programs out there. Just not everybody's taking it. Not everybody has that same experience. And we need people like you to share your experiences, not to shame us, but to help us to grow and learn as persons that want to make a difference. So thank you for sharing that, but I would definitely invite you to look at the community and put that on the forum, because there's probably a lot more out there that I am not privy to that I don't know of. So I tend to know more healthcare arena, not the non-healthcare arena, if that makes sense. Thank you for asking. Maria, did you want to make some announcements about our yummy lunch?
Absolutely, but before